Is this the right strategy for the times?
Well, what it demonstrates, Tom, is that this government is all over the place. I mean, this is a massive about-face from the point of view of the government, who have been chasing surpluses unsuccessfully ever since they've come to power. There definitely needs to be stimulus. There's no question about that. That as we come out of the coronavirus and really facing the worst economic situation since the Great Depression, there does need to be a strategy which involves stimulus, and that's going to involve spending. But it's not just a matter of, on the road to Damascus, having Josh Frydenberg now say spending is great. It depends on what spending that is, and what you actually need is an articulated strategy and plan to get Australia working again and to see the economy growing, and that's what we have not heard yet from the government.
But just on this particular strategy, when Labor had a surplus strategy that it took to the last election, in fact it said it would pay more debt off, you've presumably changed your mind now about your focus as well. You wouldn't be pursuing a surplus strategy. So aren't you in lockstep in that broad sense?
Well, I mean, we certainly think that it's very important that there is stimulus in the economy. No question about that. But the real question is how you do it. It's not just a matter of saying we're going to spend, it's a matter of saying what you're going to spend on, and whether it's going to be targeted spending in a way which actually sees jobs created and the economy kept growing. I mean, that's actually what Labor did during the global financial crisis, and very successfully saw us avoid going into recession at a time when just about every other country in the OECD did go into recession. It requires
but this recession wasn't
targeted
avoidable, was it?
Strategy. I'm sorry?
This recession surely was just unavoidable, wasn't it?
Oh, that's not the point. I mean, the point really is that what we've got here is a government which has been chasing surpluses from the day they were elected. They have done that unsuccessfully well before we saw coronavirus strike and the recession occur as a result of that. We already had an economy which was anemic. I mean, we already had an economy which, in terms of per capita growth, was in recession. So this is a government which has failed in terms of the management of the economy, but it's failed in terms of its own test in respect of debt. And now, we've got the Treasurer doing an astonishing U-turn. Well, that's fine, but it's not enough just to talk about spending. It's about what is that spending going to be on, and what is the strategy to generate jobs and generate growth.
The government wants to also talk about tax, so it's talking about retaining this tax to GDP ratio of 23.9%. Where would Labor sit on this? Should you have some sort of tax limit as well? Because you're talking about how much money you're obviously taking out of the economy in a broad sense as you're trying to rebuild.
Well, I mean, I think when we're talking about tax proposals, let's, rather than responding to the flying of kites, see what the government actually is putting forward in relation to tax. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about tax in terms of this budget. We'll have a look at what is actually put forward by the government in relation to that. Again, what we think, though, is really important is that what we hear is a strategy in relation to the building of the economy and the creation of jobs, and tax cuts are not going to do that.
I'm just asking that broad question about tax to GDP. So the government is keeping in place 23.9% as its speed limit, as it calls it. Should Labor have that or something similar, something higher? What are your thoughts?
Well, let's see what are the actual tax proposals that are put before the Parliament. That's what we will respond to. But I make the point again that tax cuts are all well and good, but on their own, they're not going to generate the jobs that the economy needs, and they're not going to generate the growth of the economy.
We had Paul Keating, of course, the Prime Minister, last time we had a recession, attack the Reserve Bank. He says that they're not doing enough to help the economy. He's suggested some pretty drastic measures. What have you made of his contribution?
Well, Paul Keating he's compulsory viewing, and his is a compelling voice, and he's not shy. We know that. I mean, I think I'll leave the commentary about the Reserve Bank's actions to Paul and not get into that. But again, our focus is going to be on the government. And again, I think the point needs to be made that ultimately what Paul's talking about is the management of debt. We've got a massive amount of debt in the economy, which was growing well before the coronavirus struck, from a government who said they were going to actually achieve the opposite. We haven't really heard from them a strategy on the management of that debt. But ultimately, the real issue again is, what is their jobs plan? And that's what we're going to be focusing on.
But he has specific criticism of the RBA. He's suggesting, for example, a really laissez-faire approach to putting more money out there, essentially no longer just letting the market decide on bonds, but just get the money out there regardless. What do you make of it? It seems like a pretty dramatic departure from what we're doing at the moment. Do you agree?
Well, again, I think I'll leave the criticisms of the Reserve Bank to Paul. We definitely need to be having stimulus in the economy. There is no question about that. We need, in that context, to be hearing from the government about what its plan is, not just that it's going to do it, but how it's going to target it, and what its strategy is in relation to that. And ultimately, we do need to be hearing from the government about its strategy in terms of how it's going to manage debt.
Just finally, the government has outlined a plan on energy, in particular on gas. The Shadow Climate Change Minister, Mark Butler, says 20 years into the 21st century, we know that coal and gas won't underpin continued prosperity. Do you agree?
Well, look, I mean, I think, Mark is speaking about a fair way in the future. What's really clear is that gas is a very important part of our economy right now and will be for a long time to come, really through our lifetimes. I mean, we are the largest gas exporter in the world. My electorate, I've got a number of companies which rely on gas as a feedstock, and companies like Incitec Pivot and LyondellBasell, and they're really important industries for our country in terms of fertilising and therefore agriculture and the petrochemical industry with LyondellBasell. So gas is a really important part of the economy. We all understand that.
But that doesn't seem to be what Mark Butler is saying. So you don't agree with that line about continued prosperity from what
look, I'm not sure that's... I think Mark is speaking about a fair way in the future. I don't actually think Mark disagrees with the points I'm making, but I think you'll have the opportunity to talk with Mark. But we all understand that gas is a very critical part of the Australian economy right now. It is going to be a really important part of the recovery out of the recession that we are in right now. And it's going to be an important part of Australian industry, really, for our lifetime. So, yes, it's a fossil fuel, but it's one that is going to play a significant role, and obviously one which does have a smaller carbon footprint than coal.
Richard Marles, thanks for your time. We'll talk again soon when we